Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the AnthroPuzzled podcast. I'm your host, Abby Letzinger, and every 2 weeks we'll explore how anthropologists are forging unique career paths beyond the usual academic sphere. Tune in, get inspired, and start piecing together your own career puzzle within the world of anthropology. On today's episode, we have Kevin Gidusko. He graduated from the University of Central Florida with a bachelor's and a master's in anthropology and currently manages the cultural resource management team at Ardurra, a nationwide engineering firm. Kevin has worked as a public archaeologist and cultural resource professional in the U.S. Southeast for the last 13 years. How are we doing today, Kevin?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to join your podcast.
Yeah, of course. So what exactly is a cultural resource management and why is that kind of work important?
So cultural resource management is an industry that's within kind of environmental services. It's a younger industry as well. If we think about something like engineering as a comparison, for example, but where it comes from in the United States is a couple of federal laws which were enacted that required a review and documentation, identification, review, documentation, and assessment of cultural resources in the United States when federal undertakings were, or federal money or federal undertakings were a part of the process, which is unclear. But so when a federal entity is going to undertake some kind of project development, et cetera, these laws stipulated that, hey, as part of this, we want to make sure that we're documenting and assessing our shared cultural history. And cultural resources can be thought of as kind of the tangible components of our shared cultural heritage. And so that might be anything from archaeological resources, historic structures, bridges, cemeteries, et cetera. And so this was mandated. And around these mandates, the cultural resource industry grew. And for the most part, prior to that, you probably only found archaeologists attached to, universities, and they would have conducted their surveys and research from their departments. But as these laws came on the books, it created this need for more specialists to conduct these resources, because now every agency was going to have to work this into a part of their process when they were conducting an undertaking. And so that's really where we fit today. Historically, it was what might be described as a lot of individual mom and pop. So a lot of folks were coming out of universities and starting their own firms and being available to service clients for these needs. And over the last couple of decades, it's grown to where there's now regional or national level cultural resource firms. Or like myself, I'm now situated in a national engineering firm that has a cultural resources arm to work on both their projects, and we also service external clients.
Okay, so like if someone was wanting to build a parking lot or some new building in an area that might have thought to have cultural heritage, like historical past, you guys would come in and kind of survey the land to see if there was anything that might prevent them from building what they want to build on that land.
Yeah, kind of. So you can think about if in federal money kind of tracks down through all sorts of different ways. So it's often attached to any number of projects, or think about any state initiated project or something to that effect, or grant funding that comes from the federal government for transportation development, infrastructure, et cetera. And so when there's that kind of that nexus and the permitting process is undertook, the state historic preservation officer, which is mandated by one of these federal legislative rules, would review the project and say, we don't have any information about this particular site, or we think that it's potentially culturally sensitive, or we need additional information. That's kind of what it's called usually, an RAI, request for additional information. So whoever, if it was an agency or a private entity or whomever, would receive this request for a cultural resource survey, and that's where we come in. And so that would be for us in the Southeast is phase one survey, which is a kind of statistical sampling, shovel testing survey of a property based on certain parameters to identify the presence or absence of cultural resources. And if there's none, or if they're not deemed to be significant, and significance is kind of determined by a couple criteria for inclusion in the National Register. If it's not significant, then the project moves forward. if we do identify items of cultural significance, we have a phase 2 or phase 3, or there's other kind of processes that come into play.
Does the training that you guys get, is it more of like archaeological training, or do you have to go get certifications for understanding how to use like GIS or 3D scanning or anything like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, in general, where most of us are coming out of are anthropology departments with anthropology degrees. And for the most part, most universities don't focus a lot on cultural resource management. There's not been a big push historically. There is now increasingly universities that are starting to create programs that specifically focus on cultural resources. But the short answer, Abby, is that most of us who have been around for a while or came into this the last decade or whatnot, didn't receive a whole lot of training. We had to kind of learn on the fly and learn on the job, or we're learning from people, our mentors who had been doing it before us. And so that's only now, in a way, at a larger scale, starting to get more standardized. And some of that training might be GIS, certainly a valuable skill to have. But, 3D modeling is something that I have in my toolkit, but certainly not everybody has it or has to have it. Understanding federal, state, and local regulations is probably one of the biggest components and probably the biggest learning curve for a lot of people. And for myself, something that I didn't really engage with in my university studies and only really had to learn once I kind of got into the field. So that's probably the biggest thing that training wise is the big differentiator.
Okay. Do you guys ever have to have multiple individuals check out a site before writing something off as like insignificant in case someone, for whatever reason, might have some kind of stock or benefit of this project being developed on this land and they'd be like, oh, yeah, no, that's not significant. Whereas someone might be like, oh, no, that is. And there's kind of like an argument between that.
That's another really good question. So the mechanism that's in place to preclude that from happening, although there's certainly, always a way, right? But in general, we've got a pretty good system where, each state has a state historic preservation office that's been set up. Each state is mandated to also have a master site file that records all of these resources. So every project that gets done by a cultural resource professional has to go back to the state, and they have to provide concurrence. So there's usually a compliance review department within each of these historic preservation offices that's going to look at the results of the survey. And so, as part of the deliverable for the surveys that we conduct, at the end of that, we will make our recommendations, an assessment of the resources. And if we make the case, essentially, it's almost like a legal case. You say, we did this, we looked at this, we looked at the soil, we looked at the history, we looked at the master site file, we talked to people, we went to the local library, we did the subsurface testing, and we found nothing. We think that this site is not significant and that, this project can move forward. And if that goes to compliance review and they, for whatever reason, thought that we didn't do our job, they could send it back to us and say, hey, go do this or go look at that. But as is often the case, we've crossed the T's and dotted the I's, and they look at it and they provide what's called concurrence. So they agree with our assessment, and then they provide a letter of concurrence that satisfies those permitting requirements for us and the client.
Gotcha. Have you guys ever come across like human remains? And if so, what do you do in those situations?
Yeah, so certainly it's a potentiality for a lot of places that you're working, some places more than others. Each state will have their own rules, and it also will kind of depend on the site, the location, the known presence or absence of human remains, etc. So usually you of course don't want to impact any human remains. So let's say it's a scenario where you had no idea that you were going to encounter human remains. The state statutes in Florida, and a lot of places are fairly similar, tell you that you have to stop work immediately. So everything that's going on stops. And you then have to confer with the state archaeologist who's going to determine if it's older than or younger than a certain set of years. If it's younger, it falls under the jurisdiction of the local medical examiner can investigate it and say, is this a potential medical legal context, right? So homicide or whatnot. If it's older, the state archaeologist will investigate and then kind of determine where to go from there. And often that's a return to the location, don't work in that area, or any number of other mitigation strategies. But yeah, it can happen. It can happen. Certainly try not to as much as possible.
So you've kind of mentioned a few of the organizations that you work with. How do you just interact or engage with them throughout the entire project?
Yeah, so if we're thinking about the different types of clients that we might have, so we're in it is perhaps good to talk about kind of the context of where we are in the industry. We're consultants. So we're not out, we don't have factories building cultural resources, right? We're here to consult other entities. Those other entities can be anything from the federal government, the state government, a local city municipality, a private entity, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's kind of lots of different groups that we will work with or work for or consult on our projects. The vast majority of those are usually kind of a project has a direct purpose. And this is usually, again, part of that permitting nexus. A survey needs to be conducted. We know what we have to do. We provide a scope of services. Once it's agreed upon, that's kind of it. So if we think about, for example, a private developer, it's someone who's very used to the process, right? They know that cultural resources are going to be a part of the project if it, certain requirements, or they know the certain requirements are going to be there. So they're not surprised. And really, we're kind of just a component of that larger project. So if you were like building a house, you got to get a plumber. Well, you get the plumber to come in and do the plumbing job. And that's kind of what we do. And so usually once we get notice to proceed from a client in a situation like that, the next time that we're communicating with them is when we've provided our deliverable to them to be presented to compliance review. Now, if it was a real, let's say a federal contract, and we were working on a project that was going to be multiple months, that's far more detailed and entailed, where we might have a project manager on that side, where we are integrating with them. Our principal investigator or project manager will have, a steady cadence of meetings and follow-ups to make sure that we're hitting whatever performance, status we need to across the life cycle of a project. And so it can kind of run between the whole spectrum there. Sometimes we've got clients who are, like, again, we're just kind of a component of a larger project. Sometimes we're part of, something that they're really interested in being very involved in. So right now we're doing, as an example, a historic structure survey in a major city in Central Florida. And the people on the other side of that, in the planning department, who are managing this, they live there, they work there, they're very interested in the project. So they come out, they've been visiting our team while they're out there documenting the structures. They've been helping us do public outreach. So it's a really good relationship that we've got with them. But it's really the full gamut of the spectrum. Sometimes it's just very, hey, we need this done. And other times it's there's a lot of more communal aspect to it.
Okay. So what kind of led you into this career path and where you are today?
Well, a little bit of just accident, for the most part. So, I didn't think that I was ever going to go to college. I started out working in restaurants when I was 15, and that was a lot of fun. And I did that for about from 15 to about 28. And it was, I did everything. I did everything from busing to managing in a restaurant. And eventually, working in a restaurant kind of got old, and I decided to go back to give college a try. And I went back to college and had kind of two things I was interested in. I've been interested in archaeology, kind of from an outside looking in point of view, and English literature. And so I took classes in both and kind of had the great opportunity to volunteer on some project work for an anthropology professor who was getting his PhD in historical archaeology in Central Florida. And like a lot of people, and the story that you'll often hear from someone who gets into like an anthropology course is they get hooked, and it's it's the most dangerous thing in the world. And so we've got a similar situation there where I got hooked and I said, well, I guess this is what I'm going to do. I volunteered as much as I possibly could there. At the time, I'd started at, community college, and then went to undergrad, then went to grad school thinking, okay, I really like this. I'm going to pursue it. And I didn't really know about cultural resource management, not really as a possible career path. But I got into grad school, and I was working by that time. I got a job with the Florida Public Archaeology Network, which was, great, and doing public archaeology, which was its own kind of thing. And I was part-time going to grad school. And halfway through grad school, I kind of went, I don't like this academic world as much as I thought I was going to. And nothing against it. People who work, I've got lots of friends who are, university professors, and they're great and they're wonderful. It's just not for me. And so I kind of started casting around and did this and did that. And I'd done a little bit of, field teching for a job here or there. And it just so happened I had someone I had worked with at the state of Florida. She had been brought on by a cultural resource management firm to open an office up in Tallahassee. And she called me one day and she said, "Do you want to be a project manager?" And I said, "Yeah, why not?" And so I moved up to Tallahassee and I started project managing and kind of fell in love with it. And so that's really where I started to really learn the industry. Really, I mean, again, I'd done a little bit here or there and kind of knew it existed, but as a like full time long term career, that's where it really started. And I did project management for a couple of years and then moved into more supervisory roles, and that's kind of been the path ever since, which has been its own fun, kind of different trajectory as well. So I've gone from what I thought I was going to just, only focus on Florida pre-contact archaeology all day, every day, to now doing, this morning I was helping someone do a historic structure survey, planning other projects, doing business development, all that kind of. It's a nice different trajectory, as I said, but totally accidental. I had no idea this was going to be what I ended up doing, but I was just lucky in that there was opportunities along the way, and I got a chance to take them.
Awesome. And I've noticed that has been the trend with a lot of the individuals I've talked to is, oh yeah, I kind of like just took an anthropology class and here I am, however many years later.
I was going to tell you a funny story. So, my wife is a bioarchaeologist, and so for years, her daughter was around both of us who did archaeology, went out, did projects, did all this stuff. Couldn't have cared less. She got into college and same thing. She took an anthropology course and she happened to take an anthropology course with a great guy who had been a TA of mine on my field school years before. And he was smart and charismatic. And all of a sudden, anthropology and archaeology was the coolest thing in the world. And she was going to get a biology degree. She'd gotten a full ride scholarship to do a biology degree. And I remember seeing him at a conference not too long after that, and I said, "Don't you do it. Do not take her over to the dark side." Because she was hooked. She was, and she ended up getting she kinda switched gears a little bit and got a sociology minor. But, it is just one of those things that really once you're in it and you get a chance to experience it and be a part of it, it hooks people. It absolutely does.
It's just such an interesting subject matter because, everyone is curious about human beings and, the differences between us and the different cultures and religions that we have. So when you kind of get an introduction into this is what anthropology is all about, it's about learning about each other, you're kind of like, oh, that actually sounds kind of interesting. Whereas if you're in like a business course, they're like, we're going to talk about checks and balances. And you're like, that,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
no, thank you.
It's intellectually stimulating, and it kind of is one of those fields of research where just about anything you can start going down a rabbit hole of wondering why and, finding some research of somebody who started looking at that. And archaeologically, it's just, it's there's always another, avenue of research to any question you've got or you wanna apply knowledge about humans to the past. It just unfolds forever and ever.
Hmm. Yeah. Now, with you going to grad school a little bit later in life than what is considered societal norms,
Yeah.
what was that experience like for you?
I think it was good. I'm glad I did it. I mentioned I don't think I was really ready to go to school when I was younger, and that's fine. Honestly, I think, for some young kids listening and says, "Hey, college isn't it for me now." That's great. Have other life experiences or other things. Because I was so glad when I did, I felt more focused on what I wanted to do. Like once I figured out anthropology was it, I was able to shape things to move in that direction. Well, I don't know if I would have if I was younger. I might have been still unsure or, second guessing and trying this out or trying that out. But kind of being a little bit older, I knew what I wanted to do. And like I said, at some point I said, I went in with the idea of, oh, maybe I'll become a professor and I'll get a PhD. I kind of had attributed to being a little bit older that I was able to say, no, I don't, it's just not going to work for me. Whereas I don't know if I would have done that if I was younger. So I kind of had that presence of mind, which I think was good. And I think also was able to understand some of the broader components of being successful in grad school, networking, building a network. I still talk to people from my cohort. We still help each other out if there's, someone we can push their direction. So I've got some friends who are now professors and I've sent them students. They've sent me students to work for us. So that's something that's paid off incredibly well. And I don't know if I would have been as cognizant of that when I was younger. So I'm glad that I did it a little bit later as a non-traditional student, and I think it kind of helped me get the most out of what grad school can do in the long term.
Yeah, I think now that I'm going back to school, I've been out of school for 4 years, and now I'm going back for another degree. I've kind of been noticing more of when I'm working with individuals who are just getting out of high school or they're getting ready to go into college. A lot of them aren't sure, or some are sure, but a lot of them aren't sure of the route that they want to take in regards to schooling, what degrees they want to get. And granted, most of them have the opportunity of they might not have any college credits that they're coming in with, which means they're going to be going through all these gen ed classes to kind of whittle down exactly what it is they want to do. But I noticed that a lot of individuals, when they go into school, and I was definitely one of them, that my parents had a big influence on what I went to go get my degree in because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know my likes. I knew a lot of my dislikes, and they were very much advocating of get a business degree. You can use a business degree in any industry. You can get a job easily with that kind of stuff. So that's kind of what I went for is like, well, I have college credits. I have a full ride scholarship through Florida Bright Futures. I might as well just go ahead and get this business degree and it'll be fine. And then about halfway through college, I realized I don't enjoy studying business one bit, which is what led me to getting the anthropology degree because I took an anthropology course and I'm like, okay, I'll go ahead and major in this as well because it's not going to add more time onto my schooling with the credits I'd come into. So I feel like whether you're waiting before going into college or you're halfway through college and decide, actually, this is not what I want to do something else, I think is appearing a lot more these days, especially with technology advances, is you're getting so much more input of things that are going on and all these different interests people have that it might take a couple of years to figure out what you want. And if you're an individual who might not have a full ride scholarship or they're going to be taking student loans out at the very beginning, it might be beneficial just to wait a couple of years and work, save up a little bit, figure out what it is you want to do so that you're not going in and like as an undeclared major, you go in, you're like, oh, don't like this, I'm going to change majors. And it just keeps adding time on and credits and pay and all that kind of stuff. I feel like
Yeah.
you don't know what you want. It might be okay to just take a couple of years as a gap year or something like that.
Think and have some you have some of those experiences, and I tell you, I saw exactly that when I got the chance to do a field school, and it was in, the Ocala National Forest in the summer. It's tough. It's a really tough field school, just in terms of the weather and what it was all like, and the work was great, it was awesome, but it wasn't, what I think most people are used to doing, and, a lot of people, it's hard can be hard manual labor. A lot of folks have not done that in their life. Anyways, point being, we started off, I think in that field school, we had 20, 25 people. And this is like, I think 9 weeks where you're doing it because you probably want to be an archaeologist. Of all those people, only 3, including myself, that I'm aware of went on to do archaeology. And I remember being in some of these giant test units, and one in particular, we were sitting there and it was this big open test unit, and we're like a meter or so down, and it's super hot, and there's mud daubers all around us buzzing, and then there's these things eating mud daubers around, and it was just, kind of miserable, and we're shaving down a level, and the guy next to me stands up, he goes, "I don't wanna do this." And he didn't. He finished the field school, but then he was done with archaeology. He went on to do something else, but it's good. You know what? He figured that out then instead of jumping into a career and saying, "Hey, I really don't like what all this entails." So I think there's value in just taking a little bit of time and space and coming at something with a little more life experience to see if it's something you really wanna chase down.
Yeah. And I feel like a lot of people or individuals who jump into college is because they're worried that if they don't go straight from high school into a tech school or go straight into college, that they're just not going to get into it. They're going to wait a couple years down the line and they're going to be like, "Ah, it's too late for me at this point. I'll just continue how I've been going." I know that's definitely like what my parents had like drilled into me was like, if you don't go to college right after you get out of high school, you might never go back. And I'm just like, I don't really enjoy school. So that's a very big.
Don't tempt me with a good time. Yeah, I know. That can be, and I mean, I'm lucky I did, my undergrad, and I graduated, had a cool job. I was living over in Cocoa Beach, and, every day after work, I go to the beach, and I was lucky enough, my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, was like, "If you really wanna advance, you're gonna have to get a grad degree." I was like, "Yeah, but that's so much work, and, like, I get to go to the beach every single day." She's like, "Yeah, but, so it's nice to kinda have that little, like, push once in a while to say, "Okay, I gotta get to that next level." But
Yeah,
it's tough, it's tough.
it very much can be. Do you have any advice for people who are looking to maybe go into grad school if they're interested in CRM work?
Yeah, there's, increasingly there's grad level programs that focus just on cultural resource management. And that doesn't mean you have to do that in order to be successful in CRM, but, I consider finding that if you don't have a particular, like a real burning research question, you wanna go work with the expert in the field doing that, but you wanna get an MA so that you can move up in cultural resource management, which in order to kind of be a supervisor at a supervisory role, you'll need a master's, so it is worthwhile. I'd check out, something like that. Now, let's say you just do have specific research questions that you want. And we certainly need those people. I'd find, the school that does that and try to find a local firm and maybe do a little bit of on-call work with them. It's very common that they'll take people who are in a program and they'll have an on-call role where, if you're available to hop on a job, you could do it. So you can get a little bit of work experience. Another kind of touching on our conversation, I think a great thing is between a BA and a grad degree is to work for a cultural resource management firm for a few years. So one of the things that I've kind of noticed is because there's not a great understanding of the industry, especially in the university system, people will kind of feel like they come out with a grad degree and they're like, okay, I'm ready to be a principal investigator. And often case they're not because they haven't written technical reports. They, again, going back, they don't know a lot of the regulations or statutes or laws that affect projects. And it's something they have to learn and they don't want to do field teching or being a field archaeologist. But that's the most important part of this is that's the foundation and the cornerstone. If you want to be a successful cultural resource management professional, you've got to put some time in the field so that you understand what it takes to lead a team, to conduct project work in an efficient and timely manner, to kind of manage it at that level. That's the bedrock of your whole future career. So, I'd kind of say if you're thinking about it, maybe work in cultural resource management for a couple of years, then go into a grad degree program, and then you're kind of set to jump back in and move forward in your career from there.
Okay. Yeah. I feel like for a lot of individuals who jump straight from getting their bachelor's straight into their master's, they have depending on what job they currently have, they don't really have any real life experience of what this career is going to offer them. And then they have all of this like book knowledge in regards to these kind of techniques or policies and whatnot. And then they get into the real world and then they get this career and they're like, ooh, this is not anything what I expected it to be based on what I learned in graduate or undergrad school.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've seen that many, 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 many times. And I think that's when, it's good to approach stuff with a little bit of humility. I've had issues in the past where I've had, a field team and the person I put in charge had a BA and someone who had been on the team, had an MA and there was some friction, perceived friction there that they thought they should be in charge. And, I had that conversation of, when confronted with it, I said, well, let's talk about that. This person's been doing it for years. They do an excellent job. I think there's a lot you could maybe learn from them and take that and move forward. That experience is invaluable. It's a title or letters after your name doesn't always mean that you've got the skills that you need to do the job. So I think just kind of getting the experience and approaching stuff with a little bit of humility goes a long way when you're coming out of a program where you might have just gone straight from undergrad to grad. Just soak it all in and learn what you can from folks.
Mhm. Yeah. Now, with an individual who might be getting into this kind of career, what salary expectations should they have?
Salary is going to vary wildly across the country and across the kind of role that you land in as a cultural resource professional. Right. So I've only been talking about really cultural resource management from a consultant's point of view, but there's people who get these jobs, maybe work in a federal agency or work for state government, local government, et cetera. That's going to be very different. I'll make some broad brushstroke statements and then anyone listening can be like, that's not how it is. But in general, if federal, a lot of folks would like federal work because it was considered to be, pretty safe and long-term opportunities there. For state jobs, there's oftentimes benefits are what kind of outweighs the pay for something like that. So someone likes, hey, just good benefits, another good long-term position. In general, private industry will have the highest salaries of all, pretty significantly higher. Within that kind of scope, it's also important for folks to remember, again, this is a market-driven industry. We're not like producers of cultural resources. We're subject to a lot of the larger market trends that are going on. So if there's a lot of development, there's more work. If there's a lot more energy infrastructure expenditure from the federal government, for example, there'll be more work in that sector if you know how to do that. Also, it matters where you live. So salaries in California are going to be much higher than salaries in Mississippi, for example. So that's always something to consider. But in general, if you're starting out at let's say a BA field technician, staff archaeologist level, which is kind of your entry level, and I'm going by what I see posted, I keep an eye on what people are paying there. You're probably looking about $20 to $25 an hour, and extrapolate that for a year. You're probably looking 40 to 50 to start, and then it goes up from there. So it's certainly just kind of the same thing as if, one of the key things is if you're working in this industry, if you have knowledge, specialized knowledge, and you're capable of managing a project, you can become very valuable. So, for example, if you do, one of my colleagues is a specialist in transportation archaeology, or cultural resource management, I should say. He's one of the best that there is. I worked with him for a long time, and everyone wants to hire him because he's got specialized knowledge. He's known for getting projects done, being efficient, all that kind of stuff. If you can build that niche for yourself as you get into cultural resource management, you greatly increase the salary potential that you can command.
Okay. So it's kind of like the more skills that you have, and with him, being known by everyone of being like, yeah, he's a great worker, he's efficient, yada, yada. He can probably negotiate a higher salary than what they were initially offering because they're like, you want me to work for you, so pay me more.
Yeah, and he's sought after. I mean, people have reach out to him and offer him jobs all the time. Yeah, but just to kind of take away from that is the industry's small overall, and people know each other, even though it's several billion-dollar industry. In a region, everybody there's kind of just 6 degrees of separation. So it's an important thing, I guess, to mention. Like, hey, if you can be a good team player with people, and you're working well, and you keep a good reputation of doing what you say you're going to do, following through, just keeping on top of stuff, that person's going to do better. I've seen it over and over longer term than, someone who's kind of just phoning it in, which may be an easy thing to say, but I've certainly worked jobs where people phone it in and do just fine, but I find not so much in this industry.
Well, is there anything we haven't talked about before we get into our final 4 questions?
The final 4 questions, I
Mhm.
think we have covered just about everything. I will say one, I guess, well, let me think. I thought of one last thing. So, in addition to if you're thinking about cultural resource management, I guess kind of two things. And you made me think of it when you were talking about going to school for business. I wish I'd done that now because I've only ever learned it on the fly or from, having me talking to our accounting team in a firm or something like that. So if you are thinking about cultural resource management, consider taking a basic level business course where you know how to read a P&L, if nothing else. I did not know how to do that. I had to learn. That is invaluable. That or putting together a budget, that kind of stuff is really good. Get some Excel skills. That stuff's really useful. Another thing is if you're going to be someone who wants to pursue cultural resource management, get involved with the service organizations or your industry organizations. So or your academic organizations. It's one of the best networking places, and it's also a place where you're going to be able to keep track of what's changing at the federal level. If there's stuff coming down the pipeline that you need to know about or prepare for, that's probably one of the most key things. And I see a lot of folks who don't do that, and it's easy to do. Just showing up, hopping on a committee, meeting people, and being a part of the industry. And it is probably one of the easiest things you can do to get yourself out there and make yourself just more aware of what's going on and make yourself more valuable.
Yeah. And you kind of perfectly answered the first question was, what's the biggest piece of advice that you would give to someone who's interested in your field? Do you have any additional pieces of advice that you'd offer, or the two that you gave were pretty solid core?
Yeah, the only other one I would say is when you're starting off, say yes more than you say no. And once you start moving up, say no more than you say yes. And what I mean by that is be open to a lot of different opportunities. When I worked at the Florida Public Archaeology Network, I had a lot of volunteers and a lot of interns. And to a T, I said, "Well, what are you interested in? What do you want to do?" And they would tell me their plan for their life for like this moment forward to the grave. And I'm going to study this and I'm going to do that. And my one piece of advice to them was you just say yes. If someone offers you a volunteer opportunity and it's something you're not at all maybe really interested in, or you're thinking, oh, that's not going to help me get where I want to go, give it a shot. Just try it out because you'll be surprised. Just about every single one of them has like veered left or a hard right from what they said they were going to do. And they're perfectly happy with it, but they took an opportunity when it came up. Once you kind of get further down the road, people are going to want you to, they've got tons of opportunities for you, right? But you've got to be able to say no to focus on what's important because by that point, maybe you've got more people depending on you. If you're a supervisor, you got a team, you got to focus, not just on yourself, but making sure that you're keeping the team afloat and moving in the right direction.
Okay. I think those are very good pieces of advices across any field, honestly, not just CRM work. Now, what are some changes that you wish to see in the industry you work in?
One of the things that I've been heartened to see is that cultural resource management has moved towards more professionalization. And so there's a bit of a history of CRM being kind of like a cowboy type thing and be a little bit wild, be a little bit loose. And it started to kind of shore itself up to be a little bit more structured in the way that it approaches and kind of comports itself. And that kind of professionalization does a lot to provide validity to the research that's being conducted or coming out of the cultural resource management sphere that sometimes gets short shrift from the academic world. But just having those standards moving up continuously is what I think is good for the industry as a whole. And so I'm glad to see that happening. And I definitely want to keep seeing that happening and seeing more infrastructure within the university system for people to become cultural resource professionals.
Mhm. On the other hand is what do you just absolutely love about your job and working within the CRM industry?
Easily, I think the same reason I worked in restaurants, I get bored so easily. I cannot do the same thing over and over. I'm a junkie for like fires to be put out. And so that's the cultural resource management issue. I never do the same thing day to day. And, I don't know what my next month is going to bring. I always have a challenge and an opportunity to overcome that challenge. And that's easily the thing I love the most about it, hands down.
Okay. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. I can especially relate to that. If I'm doing the same job over and over again, I'm just like, I've made this as efficient as possible. There's literally nothing else I can do to make it interesting, which is probably why I always stay at jobs for less than 2 years and then go find another one. So I'm like, this one's now boring. I don't want to be here. Let me
Uh,
go find something new and learn new things.
you have said exactly. I am the worst. Like once I get good at something, I don't want to do it. I'm like, okay, I'm done. I figured this out. So, yeah, I like, and honestly, there's so much of cultural resource management that like you could never get good at because there's always going to be some quirky thing that comes in or some new issue that pops up. So that part's good. And not even I get to be outside here and there, less now, but that's invigorating to kind of be out with younger field technicians and getting a chance to teach them and just enjoying that is so much better than sitting in a cubicle easily.
Yes. I agree. I can't stand sitting in cubicles. I feel so like not claustrophobic, but claustrophobic in the same way of like I don't feel like I can grow here anymore. I have reached my capacity. It's time for me to go.
It's the same reason I hated, school when I was a kid. I hated, like, the constraint of it, and I felt like I was, and I hated a bell telling me what to do. I had flashbacks today 'cause project we were working on was near a middle school, and I kept hearing the bell, and I was shuddering, Hate
Yeah, the teachers were like, "The bell doesn't dismiss you, I do." I'm like, "Then
Yeah.
what is the bell for?"
This is nonsense. So, anyways, I kinda like the free form chaotic nature of the work. Absolutely, something that keeps feeding whatever makes me happy.
Yeah, that's really great. So, where can listeners learn more about you and what you do?
Ardurra.com, or Ardurra is, the engineering firm that I work for, and they brought us on about a year ago to open up a cultural resource management service line for them. So we're servicing, internally and clients externally as well. But we've got, information there. We've also got I'm on LinkedIn, Kevin Gidusko, and you can keep track of some of the projects. We're constantly posting up things that we're working on there, but we'll also have, a lot of that posted up on the Ardurra page coming up here pretty soon as well. So our team is growing. We've got a lot of new folks on there as well. So able to take on bigger and more interesting projects and lots of cool things to check out going forward.
Awesome. Well, I had such a great time talking to you today. The conversation has just been honestly, it kind of reflects on my life. And I'm like, oh, I'm not alone in this and
Oh,
going back to college late or starting college late or anything like that. And people who get it, like not wanting to do the same thing every single day and finding a career that kind of just fills your soul rather than draining your soul.
and yes, and not to knock, there's some people is we've got, the real technically proficient folks who work for us who do this, who want to do the same stuff every day. God bless them. I'm so happy they exist. But yeah, we try to find space for everybody.
Perfect. Well, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day and thanks for coming on here to talk with me.
Thank you so much. I've really appreciated it.
All right. Bye. Thanks for listening to another episode of AnthroPuzzled. This show is produced by me and is distributed in collaboration with the American Anthropological Association. A special thanks to Cheyenne Brewer for editing the website, Leah Akers for the incredible logo design, and to AnthroPuzzled's intern Fiona for the episode descriptions. The music is courtesy of Chad Crouch, aka Poddington Bear of Sound and Picture. If you have any questions, you can reach me at abby.letzinger@anthropuzzled.com or as AnthroPuzzled on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Until next time.